Varig Vikernes made a video this morning on Thulean perspective about an ideal society, and it was a beautiful description of a tribal confederacy, which I quite like the idea of. But what I'd like to know from anyone who's willing to respond to this is, how big is a tribe? At what point do we go from being inbreds to outbreds, so to speak? And how our tribes interact, ideally, of course, because this is something very, very important if this were to be put into practice. And my criteria for what I call a tribe, personally, doesn't extend beyond really maximum 250 people, ideally around about the 160 mark. And this is based on the idea of Dunbar's number, which is got to do with how many people any one given person can actually know on a meaningful level. Not just remember their name or recognize them or anything like that, but actually know them on a meaningful level. And if we're going to consider someone part of our tribe, we need to have a meaningful relationship with them in order to establish trust. This is very, very important. Would you fight beside someone that you don't trust? Probably fucking not. But then, having said that, if Dunbar's number ranged true, and I believe it too, be around about that 160 mark, although, as I said, it can have its variances, and some people consider it to be up to 250, which I won't say is wrong, but I know for myself, I don't care for 250 people. I don't know enough people to care for in a meaningful manner, and I don't have meaningful associates that I care that much for, if that makes sense. But so by that numbering, it doesn't take long to build up a meaningful tribe. And in order to have an extended multi-generational tribal system, there needs to be some marrying and some procreating going on. And if you think about the size of your typical family, and I say typical as in like your standard nuclear family, which most tribalists would probably exceed in the number of children they have. But if we look at a family being made up of 2 parents, 2 children, 2 grandparents, that's already 6 people. Now, it doesn't take long for that to magnify and multiply to make up 160 people. Because if we look at those 6 people, that is really 6 people based around one individual. So say, for example, my situation, I am the father, say. Let's say I have 2 children and 1 spouse and 2 parents. And let's say we all live in one house. Now, maybe not one building, but one homestead. That's already me and 5 others. If we then bring in my partner's family as well, there's another 5. That gets us to 10. And then if we have some more extended family, like say some aunts and uncles and things like that, let's just assume that they don't marry and have their own children for whatever reason, this is just for hypothetical sake, we might have another 4 or something there. So let's say 4 or 5, so that's 15 people already. Now, if every one of these individuals had one friend, a different friend, we've already surpassed that number, because we'll be multiplying it by, say, 15. Even if we scaled it back down to, say, a standard extended family, so with a couple of children and some grandparents involved from both sides of the family, you've got 12. You've got a family of 12. So if every one of those people knew someone who wasn't an immediate relative you're really limited as far as diversity goes within your tribe, because 12 by 12 is what we'd sort of be looking at. You've got 144 there. You might have one family that is not, like you'd have to add in an entire another family that's not related to you in order to have some sort of genetic diversity. Otherwise you're really all family. So at what point are we not too closely related that it's okay to breed with? On an ethical level is one thing, but if we just speak biologically, what's important to consider, it's a taboo topic, I guess, but what's important to consider is what are the negative effects of so-called inbreeding and outbreeding. Well, inbreeding, what's happening is we're collaborating very, very similar genetic makeups and reinforcing certain attributes. So this can be good in a positive sense if we have strong desirable attributes that we want to maintain and prolong. This is while we have pedigree and pure breeding plans for all sorts of animals like dogs and horses and whatnot. However, the trouble with breeding so closely with someone so closely related, there's a good chance that we share a similar negative, undesirable genetic trait. And if we breed with this person, it's going to also magnify and what's the word? Stabilize. But there's a greater chance of the offspring not only inheriting this negative trait, but also magnifying it and making it worse. So that's what we need to consider. And how much diversity do we need before we can sort of feather out those types of traits? And then on the contrary, we've got the outbreeding side of things, where if you breed with someone too far unrelated, where you have no common traits, which is pretty extreme obviously, example, but someone who has not shared the genetic factors needed to, say, survive in your environment because they're from a different geographical location, you're setting your children up to have a 50-50 chance of just being able to survive where you live. Yeah, you might adapt as an adult if you move somewhere, but to raise from infancy, possibly not suited to your climate or geographical location at all, it's a pretty shit hand to be dealt. So there's that to consider. And while you might potentially not strengthen the undesirable traits from inbreeding, you're also not strengthening the desirable traits from breeding closely. So there's that to consider. So there needs to be a balance point somewhere in between. And I think it's really just a matter of fraction and numbers. And I talk about different cousins and things like this, and how some places it's legal to marry your cousin, or not until they're your second cousin or third cousins or whatnot. And I think there's definitely something to that, because if you think about it, what your cousin is, or what cousins are, it's someone who you're not immediately related to, but you share a common ancestor with. And those degrees of cousins, whether they be first or second or third or what fourth, shows how far back you are stemming from the same two people. So your second cousins would share a great-grandparent. I personally think this is probably a little bit too closely related to be desirable. But behind that, third cousins, I wonder, is this far enough apart that it's not too close? Now, let me know what you think, whoever may be watching this, because these are the types of questions we should be asking, and we should know the answers to if we want to make our ideal society's reality. Because it's fun to dream about idealist societies, but what would be even more fun is making them realities. And no, I'm not just talking about how can we sleep with our cousins and make it reality, because that is perverted.